everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Transracial Adoption, Positive or Negative. My name is Xinru Viola, and I'm here with my co-host, my mother.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth. Today we're going to be looking at what it was like to bring back an adopted child from China to the UK and how things went for the first 2 to 3 years before I adopted a second child. Before that, Xinru's going to give us an update on her plans for a trip to China.
So it's been a while since we filmed the last podcast episode, and there have been many drastic developments in my proposed trip to go to China. I started my online classes and I studied Mandarin online about 20 hours a week for about 5 weeks, and it was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed it, and the intention was always to then transfer to in-person classes once I got to China and got through the quarantine. For some reason, China's policy is not allowing general scholar students and non-degree program students to get into the country, despite opening the borders for bachelor, master and PhD students. So I've tried every possible way. I have looked at every single possible route and solution to try and get into China this year, but unfortunately I've had to accept that I will not be able to get into China for this academic year, and because it has a knock-on effect with my Portuguese residency, I have decided to put these plans on hold for now and hopefully get to China maybe 3 or 4 years time, but I'm not going to go unless it's absolutely certain and definite that the borders are open, and I'll definitely be able to go. It's really unfortunate, it's really sad, but I have suspended my studies for a second year and I won't be going. So it's a shame.
Yes, it's been very difficult and very upsetting for her to have come all this way and then be told suddenly that because of their zero COVID policy, she can't go to China. But I think it's been upsetting for a lot of Chinese adoptees, including both my daughters, who were hoping to go to China and visit their home cities and so on. It's just not possible at the moment, and we don't know how long it'll be.
Yeah, I was reading the news this morning actually, and they were saying that more cities in China are actually back in lockdown, including Wuhan.
Really?
Yeah. To start this episode then, Mum, what was it like bringing me back? We briefly touched upon that at the end of the previous episode, but talk us through the key moments, I suppose, or the key things that you went through or noticed during the time that I was in England initially, and how I settled in and what it was like for both you and for me. Anything in particular that you noticed?
I think sort of things I can remember are that I wondered how soon you would be able to understand English and obviously eventually be able to speak it, but it was more important. I found it quite worrying, maybe all parents do, to have a child that was pre-verbal, because I thought if she's got anything wrong, she can't tell me where the pain is or what's wrong. I can't get through to her if she doesn't understand English. So I was very observant as to how long it took you to understand. You started to understand some things almost immediately.
Really?
Yeah. Children do at that age. They're like sponges, really.
So that was because you were talking to me and pointing at things?
Yeah, I tried to keep talking. They say keep talking, don't they? But it doesn't really come naturally when you're just alone with a child who can't reply to keep talking all the time. I did try, but I noticed a big difference when I got Xing. She was then brought into a household where 2 people were talking to each other, you and me. And it was different when it was you. She picked up English quicker than you, and I think that's because she could hear it being spoken all the time. And however hard I tried to keep talking, you start to feel worn out and stupid in the end. No, I tried to keep talking and read you from books and stuff like that, just to keep the words going and all the rest of it, playing little games and things. So you started to pick it up and understand it quite well within a couple of months. And then I reckon you started to say little things after about 4 months, by which point you understood English well. I suppose you started saying the odd thing, certainly before 2. The assessment, I took you on arrival, well, probably a couple of months after arrival, to be honest. The doctor wanted to assess where you were, and they said you were about a month behind children of a similar age.
How do they assess children at that age when they can't really speak?
They have
just games and...
No, this wasn't about speaking. This was about everything.
Okay.
About what you could do and where you were developmentally, which seemed all right because I know you'd been back at the children's home, and I think that had really set you back before I got you. So that was fine, and then you started nursery. Now I was concerned when you started nursery because everybody said, oh, it's a hard step for any child, but particularly for a child that's, you know, only been adopted a few months before. They might be worried about it, it might be difficult for them and everything. So I negotiated with the nursery, who normally only allowed parents a week to get their child gradually involved in the nursery, and then they had to leave them. I talked them into letting me have as long as I wanted. So I started you there for half an hour at a time with me in the room from about 2 weeks before I went back to work. And you were fine right from the start. I remember going into this little room with all these other children. They were all the ones up to the age of 2. And they were all around these little tiny tables with little tiny chairs. And you just ran up to a spare chair and sat down. It was as if you'd been there before. It was strange. I mean, you had been with me to collect Douglas from a nursery where perhaps they were doing that. I don't know whether you'd seen that in that context before. I don't think we'd done anything similar really during my adoption leave. But you obviously just summed it up. You know, the kids go and sit in one of those chairs, and you went and sat in one of those chairs as if you'd been doing it for years. It was strange. But children pick things up quickly. You ran and sat down in a chair. I stayed in the room the first couple of times, and then the nursery nurses said to me, to be perfectly honest, she's fine. Why don't you go for a walk this time? So I did. I walked around for an hour or so, came back. She's been absolutely fine. Then I left you for half a day, and so it went on. And then by the time I went to work, you seemed quite happy to be there. You had seen Douglas at nursery. We'd often picked him up during my adoption leave. Once a week, we'd often gone to pick him up from nursery. So I think the whole thing seemed quite familiar. Yeah, it went really smoothly, and so many people had told me about the awful problems they'd had. But the interesting thing was that the nursery nurses, I kept rejoicing. I kept saying to the nursery nurses, oh, isn't it great that she settled down? I was so worried. I thought, I've got to go to work. I can't have any more time off. What if she hates it? What if she won't go in? And they said to me, oh, we knew when you first came in, before we even met her, that she'd be fine. And I said, what do you mean? That's not possible. And they said, oh, we always say we can tell whether a child will settle in by meeting the mother. If the mother wants them to fit in and be happy and settle, they do. And we could tell that you really wanted it to be successful, and it was. Interesting, isn't it? Because I must say, certainly with the school context, I know one or two people whose children didn't settle in at all well. And if you looked at the mother, you could see why. They wanted to...
They're very clingy.
The mother wanted to be needed. I didn't want to be needed. I wanted you to be fine. I had to work. No. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So you were fine. And then I settled into work, and I was a bit worried that my work would be impacted by having all these new responsibilities and very restricted hours. I could not go in early. I could not stay late. And that, for me, that was hard because I'd always started work early, and I couldn't do it with you.
So what time did I go to nursery?
I used to drop you off sometime after 8 o'clock and then pick you up sometime after 4. So I used to try not to make it too long a day, but it was still longer even than a school day. But I didn't know what else to do. It was really, I had to work those hours. And I did take 1 day a week off. I managed to afford that. So I used to take, I think it was Mondays off.
It was, I remember.
So we had 3 days for the weekend, and then you had 4 days at nursery. And not only that, but sometimes my parents used to have you for a few days, because I felt even 4 days a week might be quite a lot for such a young child not to have total one-to-one attention. So every now and then I'd take you down to grandma's for 2 or 3 days off nursery, and then they'd give you lots of attention. And
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that gave me time to catch up with housework and do a few chores and maybe work late for the odd day at work, but it was very rare that I was ever able to do that. But my work didn't suffer. With 1, it didn't suffer. Once I had 2, it really was difficult then. And I think perhaps my work did suffer then, because I was having so many broken nights at the second time. And you probably woke up once every second night on average. And I could cope with that, having to get up in the night once, but not every night. It didn't seem to affect my health or anything. But during my adoption leave, I did have bad health in a minor way. I kept having colds and infections for the whole time. I was off for 5 months, and for most of it, I had some sort of cold or infection. And I was worried stiff that this would go on when I got to work. I thought, how can I work and look after a child if I'm never feeling completely well? How am I going to do it? I remember talking to Grandma and being in tears, saying, I can't cope with it if it carries on like this. And she was just very reassuring. Don't worry, you'll be fine. You'll get over all this. It'll all be okay. And she was right. Almost from exactly the time I started work, my health got back to normal.
Why do you think that is?
Stress, change, unfamiliarity of the situation. I don't know. But stress can do amazingly big things to you in terms of health and everything. It was the stress. And jumping ahead a bit, when I adopted Xing, and I had 2, and it was all much harder, I had these low-grade health issues for 18 months after I got her, well into the time I was back at work. The second time I thought, I know this ends after about 4 months, hooray. It didn't. So 18 months, unbelievable. Things like, I don't know, I got a splinter in my thumb and it went septic. I mean, so many silly little things. Just so many silly little things. So that's a danger for single parents. I must say, I did hesitate about a second adoption because I was thinking about that all along. Could I have a second child?
Even from when I first arrived back?
Yeah, because I'd felt so unwell. But then as soon as I started to feel well and everything went fine and I was working and it was all going okay.
No, but I meant even when I first arrived, you were already thinking about a second.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. I'd always thought ideally it'd be nice to have 2. Definitely, yeah. I think everybody thinks that, though, don't they? More or less everybody. So once it had all settled down and I was fine, I thought, yes, I would like to go for a second one. But they won't, or in those days, they wouldn't accept an application until you'd had the child for at least a year. So I knew I had to wait. And so everything was quite good. It was hard work, but it was fine. We went on a few trips. I tried much too hard to take you around to meet everyone, to take you on visits to relatives, visits to friends. I overdid it, really. I should have just relaxed and not tried to do so much. And I used to take you every Saturday into the Chinese centre because I thought that was really important, that you got to know all the people there. I used to take you down to Grandma and Jack's quite a lot and to see Vivian and Douglas. I used to take you to Odds Farm Park all the time because I knew you'd grown up with your foster parents in the country. And I thought, having seen the area outside Hefei, I thought they've got buffalo and all these chickens and other animals and things that I thought, might make you feel at home or ring a bell or something. So I used to take you to Odds Farm Park a lot with Douglas.
So let's go back to the Chinese community then. So how soon after I got to England did you take me there and what was my reaction?
It was a week later, on the Saturday. I think we got back at the weekend and I took you the following Saturday. Everyone was very interested and made a fuss of you and everything. But yeah, an interesting point really is that even though you were quite confident and sociable all the time, when I took you into the Chinese centre, you didn't look distressed in any way, but you didn't want to leave me, which wasn't your usual reaction to things. So you didn't want to be put down to walk. You didn't want anyone else to take you. So
even though they were visibly, they were Chinese.
Yeah. In spite of that, or maybe because of it, I don't know whether it confused you about, is this like China again, or why has it changed back to Chinese people around all the time? I don't know. There's not much point in speculating. Really. See, some people would have made immediate speculation. She doesn't want to go back to China. She doesn't like being with Chinese people. That's nonsense. I don't know what it was. Maybe it's just a crowded room. It wasn't particularly noisy. But I remember thinking at the time, I'd heard that some people had said, my child cries if they see a Chinese person, so it's not fair to take them to a Chinese environment because they're distressed by it, because it means they're thinking they're going back to China. I don't know whether that interpretation is correct. All I can say is my feeling was, well, if she doesn't like it in this environment, she's going to have to get used to it because she's got to like Chinese people. That's non-negotiable because she is a Chinese person. I can't just say she doesn't like Chinese people. Not that was your reaction, but you were just a bit nervous, I think. So I took you there religiously every Saturday, and on about the third or fourth occasion, I saw a sudden change. You sort of, how children kick their feet to be put down. You wanted to be put down, I put you down, you ran in. That was it. Whatever it was that was bothering you had gone.
Maybe it was that, I was worried that you would disappear and leave. And maybe when I knew that you were there, always there, and you weren't going to go, then I felt more comfortable.
Yeah, whatever it was, I don't know. And they were all very friendly and made a fuss of you. And at the time, you were the youngest one there. Obviously, there were quite a lot of slightly older children. Yeah, so we used to go regularly, and you'd play with some of the older children. And as you know, there was Patrick, one of the men, who took a great fancy to you because he hadn't at the time got any grandchildren, and he loved children, so he used to make a big fuss of you.
Yeah, he took me to McDonald's.
You were wary of him at first. I remember saying, when he finally got you to sort of play with him and go around with him, I remember saying, oh, you've put a lot of hard work into making friends with her. But a lot of the women did too, but it was him perhaps more than anyone, yeah. And then he used to sometimes take you out and things, yeah. My mother noticed when she came to China, the Chinese men are so affectionate to children, aren't they? You know, in England, if a man was affectionate to a child, some people might think it was a bit creepy or suspect, but it's a very normal thing for Chinese men to be very friendly with children. So that was the Chinese centre. I'm trying to think what else would you like to know about your childhood before we got Xinru?
I know that my first holiday was to Greece when I was 2. So
yeah,
tell us more about going away on a holiday abroad with me as a single parent, but also the process of me, I guess,
me
being naturalised, and because I had a Chinese passport. So what happens when you adopt internationally? The child comes back. You know, you said before that I had to get a visa for my Chinese passport, but then what happens then? How do I become a British citizen?
The whole passport thing was an absolute nightmare. I'll say briefly, I tried to get you to go to Holland to visit friends, and you still had your Chinese passport, and so I went to get you, as I thought, a visa to go to Holland. Went up to the Dutch embassy, couldn't get one. They treat people with non-Western passports like vermin, and they're not unusual. I think Britain does that.
So was that the standard procedure for a Chinese passport holder to go to Holland? Had to get a certain visa, and they just wouldn't give it.
They wouldn't give it to me. I could have got my friends to have a notarized letter, obviously costing money and going to a lawyer, to say that I was staying with them and that there was nothing untoward about what was going on. But isn't it ridiculous that I was a British citizen who'd been to Holland loads of times, and you were legally adopted by me? I took all the papers. It wasn't enough. You had to have all this notarized. I mean, as if you would become an illegal immigrant, you see. That's what they were worried about. You were one. Absolutely insane. So Western countries treat non-Western passports in the most cavalier and unpleasant way. I was furious at the end. So I thought, right, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, so then, of course, I thought, right, we must hurry up getting the British passport. So I sent all your documents, filled it all in. You have to send it, first of all, for naturalisation and then to get a passport. Sent everything to the Home Office, didn't hear anything for ages. And then I was at a conference and telling people, I know there's a 10-month wait or whatever it is for the passport, but it's in the pipeline. And he said to me, I advise you to check it. There's been a whole scandal about lost papers at the Home Office. You need to go and check it. So I rang up, I think, and they looked it up and they said, oh, yes, I'm afraid your papers are all lost. You'll have to apply again.
What?
And luckily I hadn't had to send the passport, I don't think, because I still have it. So they obviously didn't lose that. I think it was just a set of adoption papers, birth certificate. There was another one, I can't remember what that was. So a whole set of your papers, and we only had a very limited number of your papers from China, had been lost by the Home Office. I had this whole conversation with them saying, well, where are they? We don't know. I said, so someone else may have them, and in 20 years' time, another woman may be trying to get into Britain on my daughter's paperwork then. And she said, no, we can tell you for sure that won't happen. I said, if you don't know where the papers are, you can't reassure me of that. Yes, we can. I don't know, going round and round in circles. Maybe they did know where they were. Maybe they knew they'd accidentally destroyed them. I don't know. So I was furious because, I think it was 3 sets of papers. One had been destroyed within a year. And for the rest of your life, if you lived to be 100, the only birth certificates I had, there were 2. If I sent off one more, you'd only have one. It was awful. And the only way, there was no way to get another one short of going to Hefei and applying for another birth certificate. And even that wasn't a guaranteed way around it. So, it was a nightmare, really.
But when you sent the original off again for the second application, did you get those back afterwards?
Well, it worked the second time, and I did get them back. But really, I was horrified that within 1 year, one set of your precious papers had completely gone. And it got to last you your whole life. So I was worried. But anyway, there we are. So they sent the naturalisation papers, and then you apply for the passport. And then it takes longer to get a passport when you've naturalised a person than it does when you're just getting an ordinary passport. Eventually, I think it was 14 months after I got you, it just turned up in time for my planned holiday in Greece. It just turned up in time. I was so worried about it.
Mm.
But anyway, we got you the passport. And then in the long run, I had to apply to naturalise you again in England. Sorry, to adopt you again in England.
What? Why?
Because, well, it didn't end up happening, but I'd started the process. I'd had my first interview.
But why?
Because that was the only way to get you a British birth certificate. And I thought, I can't risk her only having 2 copies for the rest of her life. If at some stage, let's say when you're 70, the last one disappears, you've got no birth certificate, literally none, and there's no record of it in this country. So the only way to get a British birth certificate was to re-adopt you, which I was furious about having to do, but I thought I should.
So it's considered, so you adopted me in China and then this certificate to show you adopted me in England or something?
Well, we didn't have to because the law changed. Well, we knew they were going to bring in a law that an adopted child could then apply to register the birth certificate in England. That was a change in the law. But none of us expected they would backdate it, and they did.
Oh.
So I was able then to send off your birth certificate and get a British birth certificate. So now if you ever need a new one, it's registered in Britain and you can just apply as in the normal way to get your birth certificate. But I was furious at having to do that because they'd lost one of my 3 copies. Anyway, yeah, so we did that and we went to Greece. And my friend came with us, Carol, and it was fine travelling with you. We went to a resort on the island of Lesbos, and everyone in Greece is so friendly to children. Again, a bit different from the British, really. Everyone made a huge fuss of you. There was that lovely man, do you remember? Was it Costas?
I don't know, I was 2.
There's photos of him. He had an ice cream stall in the resort where we were staying. And if we walked past, he suddenly used to rush out of his ice cream stall with a little cone with a little bit of ice cream, with a scoop of ice cream on it, and hand it to you. Just so lovely. Not expecting payment. I mean, we did go and have ice creams at his shop in the end. I felt we had to, and I do like ice cream. But yeah, he was lovely, and there were so many people who were so nice, making a fuss of you. And yeah, we had a lovely time.
Did it look obvious that I was not your birth child?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But the Greeks all seemed to just accept it quite happily. Yeah. Well, and in Britain, really. Yeah. That's an interesting question, isn't it? Did people accept it? Yeah, they did.
Yes. What was the reaction when you started going around?
Everyone very positive, really. I think most people realised you must be adopted. The odd person perhaps thought I was the birth mother, but they used to be nice. There was just one, I probably told you this, there was one negative reaction. I took you over to the park one day when I just got you really within the first few weeks. And this elderly woman was sitting there and she was beaming and making a fuss and saying, oh, and then she said eventually to me, having praised the situation, oh, your husband must be delighted with her. And I said, I'm not married, I've adopted her as a single. And her face dropped and she barely spoke to me and she went off. I don't know why to this day. Why she was so disapproving. Even if she was one of these very moral people who didn't think a woman should give birth outside marriage. I mean, I hadn't done that. I'd adopted you. I hadn't done anything that she could regard as immoral, but she didn't like it.
But assuming prior to discovering that you're a single parent, she must have thought that I was adopted anyway, so it can't have been that.
No. I don't know what it was. Some people are weird.
Yeah, that's very weird.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be wary of people coming and asking intrusive questions, but in my experience, if people came up and started asking lots of questions, I almost invariably found that either they were adopted themselves or they had adopted children, and they were asking the questions from a very personal interest in the subject. So I completely stopped being paranoid about people asking questions. I very rarely, if ever, felt they were being really intrusive for a unacceptable reason, I would say. How about you?
Oh yeah, I think I've only recently learnt that lesson, or kind of come to the realisation that those who ask me intrusive questions generally aren't doing it ill-intentioned, and that there is a reason behind it. Because typically when people do come and ask me, I would say quite intrusive questions, I do get very annoyed and I close up and I get quite defensive, and not aggressive, but I just don't like disclosing certain information, because I do feel, oh, why should a stranger have the right to know my complete life story? And so I want to know who I'm telling things to, and I kind of think that it's almost disrespectful to be asking such intrusive questions by a complete stranger. But then most of the time, well, actually, I'm not going to say most of the time, quite a lot of the time I then discover that actually it's because either they're adopted themselves, or they know people, or their family have adopted, or as you say, it's because they have a strong interest in adopting. So that's why. But I think it'd be easier for me to open up and actually talk about those things if they started with that. I have an interest in adopting. It would be great to talk to you.
I do try to be tolerant of people, even when they do ask unfortunate questions, because I'm aware, I'm ashamed to say, that when I was quite young and at work in central London, there was a man there who adopted a child, and I think the way I spoke of his adoption, I wasn't rude, obviously, but I think I may be insensitive. I'm pretty sure I spoke in a slightly insensitive way, really, about this child. I think it was about 5, this little boy he'd adopted. Of course, I would never have been nasty. And maybe I'm worrying unnecessarily. But I always think, well, I think I was insensitive. So if people are a bit insensitive to me, I'll try and be a bit tolerant of that. Because perhaps people don't understand until they're in that situation themselves. That's the trouble, isn't it?
I have another interesting question to ask you that I don't actually think I've asked you before.
Oh, gosh.
And that is, when did I know... Well, I think I've asked you this before, but not in detail, or at least I can't remember. But when did I know that I was adopted? Because I know when people ask me that, I just say, for as long as I can remember. But is there any specific time that you remember that I just said that I'm adopted? Did you ever hear me say that? How did it come to that? In between, because obviously before we adopted Ching, I was speaking. So, how did it become apparent, at least to you, that I was aware that I was adopted?
I don't remember exactly when you spoke of it, but it's something that we always, I and lots of other people as well, talk about right from the start. I can't understand how so many people in previous generations didn't even tell their children, or not until they were grown up, that they were adopted.
I think a lot of that is with domestic adoptions, where they're of the same race.
It is, where you could do it, but I suppose I could not have told you until some big reveal at about 5 or 6 maybe, but I talked about it all the time right from the start. We had books. Do you remember we had those books about adoption?
I remember a book where you see the little family go on the little aeroplane and then they go to get a child.
I had lots of books.
Yeah.
Do you remember that I Love You Like Crazy Cakes? That
American I remember that
about
one.
a white American woman adopting a Chinese child. There's all sorts of books, really.
I remember that one.
There's one in black and white. I don't know why it's black and white, but there's one with all sorts of pictures of the whole process of adoption in China, which we've still got, which I thought was pretty good. You may not remember these, but I used to show you them and talk about, this is like when we went to the lawyer's office and signed all the papers, and this is like when we got on the aeroplane, or when we went on the tour bus, and, it's good for children if you've got the books and the pictures. I showed you the photographs, and we had the video, of course, the video of your adoption. And, this is the guide, and this is the... So
we just sat down on the TV, me, a little 2-year-old, and just watched it? Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't always understand everything, but you just grow up knowing all about it. So there was never any doubt that you knew about it. Yes. So I'm sure you knew. You might not have understood it totally, but you knew the word, you knew that you'd come from China, you knew that you'd lived the first part of your life somewhere else.
I knew that I didn't come from your belly.
Yes.
Because I'm pretty sure that's in a lot of the books.
Yeah.
I remember that. Something like, oh, some babies come from their mum's bellies, and then other babies this and that. And then I think I remember one of the books, I guess it's trying to be positive, but I think it's a bit weird now, where I'm pretty sure one of the books has a page where it's like a shop. And it's like there's like loads of babies, and it's like your mum chose you from this like
terrible.
place of all the and I remember now I wouldn't like that.
Wasn't one of my books.
But I think I've seen a book like that. Yeah.
No, that definitely wasn't in one of ours. So I think you knew all along, really. What I didn't tell you explicitly was you are Chinese in the sense of looks or anything like that. I think a lot of parents did talk about that as a thing, and I probably thought I would, but I never did that. You obviously heard the word China in terms of photos of where I adopted you and everything, and we went to the Chinese centre. And so I wasn't sure when you would first realise the racial difference between us. And a lot of the talks I'd been to said it would be at about 4 or 5. But as I think I mentioned before, I believed the ones who said no, they noticed right from the start, really. And I believe that's true because you definitely notice racial differences at the age of 2.
How?
Well, first of all, my aunt had given you a lovely book with lots of different racial types in it. And used to go through it. A board book. Tell you how young you were. It's a board book. You only have that when you're very small, don't you? And you used to point, and there was a little mixed race boy, and you used to point and say the name of a boy who looked very much like that in your nursery class. There was a little Chinese girl with pigtails, and you used to say Hannah Ming, because we knew a little girl who had at the time pigtails who looked like that. And you used to point at, there was a black child, and you said somebody else's name. So I thought, my God, she really does know. You were definitely aligning these figures in the book with people who were racially similar amongst our acquaintance. And that was at 2. So no one can tell me children don't notice racial difference at 2.
So I never looked and said, me.
No. And the other thing, again, as I told you before, that we were walking down the street somewhere away from home, and a Chinese person walked by and you said, oh, look, Mummy, he's from the Chinese centre. Because they were the only Chinese people I suppose you knew. And I said, oh, yeah. And then you said, we're Chinese, aren't we, Mummy?
No.
Yeah. And I just said yes, I didn't know what to say. And then a few minutes later, you looked at me very suspiciously and said, are you Chinese? So I had to say, well, no, I'm not. But,
wait, how old was I?
2.
I said, are you Chinese?
Yeah. Because I said yes to the are we Chinese? And I thought, doesn't she realise I look different? And then there was, are you Chinese? So, again, at 2, you knew I wasn't. You'd noticed the difference.
So you said no?
I said no. Yeah. And explained about, some people look different, blah, blah, blah. But you definitely... So not to have addressed your need to know Chinese people at 2 would have been a mistake if you had not known anyone who was Chinese at the age of 2. I think that would have been awful. But I'm sure that's the case with some children, isn't it? Maybe if you live in a white area, they literally might not know anyone.
And what was it like me interacting with the other adopted babies, both from China and other countries? Because I know from a very young age, I kind of I grew up with Eloise, and she's obviously Chinese.
Oh, well, yeah, that you all got on really well, yes. It was really nice that you all had each other to play with, so you knew that you'd grow up knowing someone from exactly the same background. I don't suppose any of you ever talked about that, did you?
Not at that age, no.
But I think it was really good that you all knew each other well. Quite a few of you, weren't there, that all sort of got to know each other, especially Eloise and Christine, and getting to know you and Ching Ching, and you're all still really good friends. So that was really nice.
Yeah. And then finally, to wrap up this episode then, before we talk about adopting Ching Ching, how did you tell me that I was potentially going to get a younger sister, and what was my reaction?
I think I may have asked you, would you like a sister? And of course, you immediately said yes, because a lot of your little friends at nursery had older and especially, younger brothers and sisters. And you were very attracted to the idea. I think you felt that there was a lot of potential for boasting and having a good time and, being like everybody else. I think you thought it was a really good idea. Yeah, you were definitely happy about it right from the start.
So this was from about 2, you'd say?
Well, I may have just broached the subject when you were 2, because obviously I was going to start I had to before the home study, because I couldn't have a social worker coming to the house and you knew nothing about it. So it would have been when you were about, I don't know, 2.5 or something. Of course, to you at that age, it just took forever to go through the process. It must have just seemed an eternity, really. But so I told you probably before I told anyone else. I delayed telling the family because I thought, they're going to think I'm mad. How can I take on another one? How can I afford it? I've got the time and the stress and everything like that. And telling friends, they all thought I was mad. Everyone thought I was mad to go for a second one. was barely anyone who went, oh, how wonderful. Some people did, but not many. And they all thought, oh, you don't realise how hard it's going to be. But I did think it was a good idea. I thought it was good for you to have a Chinese sibling. I thought that would, and a sibling at all, which, someone to play with, someone to take the pressure off you. So it wasn't just, I felt it was quite an intense relationship, just one adult and one child. And that maybe it would be good if it wasn't just the two of us. I thought it would be better to have a third person. In fact, I thought it would be nice to have had two more. But at the point at which I got number 2, I knew that was the end. I knew I wasn't going to get a third one. I just couldn't imagine it.
So I was excited, and how did I get involved with the preparations?
Just getting a few bits and pieces together, but really I just used all the equipment and the clothes from you, so there wasn't much preparation to be done. You met the social worker, obviously, when she used to call in. And,
did she talk to me about it?
She did. I think she only met you once, and then she asked to see me without you so we could talk in more depth. I do remember her being there, and you showed her some of your books and your bits and pieces. I don't know. I remember going upstairs with you to get your stuff and then coming down and you showed them to her. So she definitely met you. I remember that. And then, of course, by the time we were ready to go to China, you were old enough to be very chatty. So you told all your friends at nursery that you were going to have a sister, and how exciting and all this sort of thing.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you were 3. I mean, you were talking a lot. Yes. So having been behind your age group when you started nursery, you then, at the age of 3, everyone on their 3rd birthday, it was a really big nursery, got moved up to the next room, which was for the 3 to 4 year olds.
So only when you turned 3?
Yeah, they had what they called the schoolroom section, or school. There were several little rooms where you did all sorts of lovely activities. It was a beautiful nursery. And I remember as we approached 3, I said, oh, is she going to be moved up on time to the schoolroom? And I remember they just stared at me and said, of course, why? And I said, well, when she had to be moved up from the baby room to the 2-year-olds, which was the garden room, she was a little bit behind in her speech and development. But they said, we're going to put her up anyway on time because she's so keen to learn. And they said, I can't believe you're telling me that. She's one of the best we've got. She's, doing so well. There can be no question that she's raring to go. So between 2 and 3, you've gone from being a little bit behind to being one of the best in the group. And these were all children of professionals. We're not talking about children from difficult backgrounds. All children of people who were senior to me at work, generally. So you were doing well by then. In that year, you'd really picked up. Amazing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Was nursery must have been really expensive as a single parent?
It was extremely expensive, yeah. I could just about afford it for one child, but of course once I then had 2, which was only for a short period of time, thank goodness, because then you went to school, but during the time I had 2 at nursery, it was cripplingly expensive. I just had to use my savings to cover it. But luckily it was only for a short period of time. Once you were at school, it was free. Well, no, it wasn't entirely free because I had after-school care and holiday clubs and things. So it was still, maybe a couple of £1,000 a year, even in the money those days, which was worth a lot more then than it is now. But it was doable then. Yeah.
Any last words for this episode?
Not really. I'm doing all the talking because you can't remember it.
Yeah, I can't say anything up until the next couple of episodes, the next few episodes.
Yeah, you'll probably be able to start talking a bit more once you get to school. You'll be able to describe it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for listening to this episode. Next time we're going to be talking about our trip to China to adopt Ching Ching.
See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.